All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back. Today we'll be talking about the theory of evolution. There's a lot of Christian scholars that agree that you can be a Christian and believe in evolution. So I took this from Uma's Healing. I'll put the link down below, where Anthony Williams speaks about the theory of evolution. I added all the other clips that I found online. So all those short clips, you can find the longer form online. Check it out.
It's like, how much do you guys want to know? You might be somebody that believes that, we came from a smaller animal. We came from a fish in the ocean. We came from a fish in the ocean, and then that fish crawled out of the ocean, right? And then that fish turned into a lizard, right? So now the fish is a lizard. Now the lizard turns into a chicken, right? And then we turn into a pig, and now we're a pig, right? But really, when we get taught that, we're just a sheep. We're sheeple when we get taught that. It happens all the time. We get taught these things. So we think we just came from a microorganism somewhere, and that microorganism turned into, a little sea creature down in the ocean. That sea creature then turned into a bigger sea creature, and turned into a fish, and now we're on the land, and now we're trying to get lungs, and now we're evolving, and now we got lungs. And then we got lungs, and we can breathe, and we turn into this lizard, and then we're growing out, and now we're a monkey. Now we're a monkey. And then we're a monkey, and then we turn into an orangutan, and then we turn into, a big gorilla, and now for some reason we're a gorilla, and then we turn into a human. But why didn't all the other gorillas turn into humans? Did you ever think about that one, by the way? So we're being trained to believe that we evolved, right? Okay? Right? Think about it, right? We're trained to believe we evolved. So we're just still an evolving species. No, we're not. We're not an evolving species. We're not. We as a species, we don't evolve. You evolve spiritually. Maybe you took a yoga class. Maybe you went to a mountaintop and prayed. Maybe you read a spiritual book. Maybe you read medical medium spiritual books, right? Learned all about the other angels. Maybe you learned about other meditations, right? You're evolving spiritually, all you guys. Physically, no, we're not evolving. That didn't believe in anything. People that just think we float on a rock. We're on a rock. You die, you're nothing. You float on this rock. You die, you're nothing. Evolution's why we're here. We were a monkey. We were a snail. And then the snail crawled up the shore and we became a lizard. Then the lizard was on the edge of the shore, and the lizard grew into a possum. And then the possum grew into a bear. And then the bear grew into a monkey. And then a monkey grew into a giraffe. Then a giraffe grew into a tiger. And then finally we became, tiger became a gorilla. And then the gorilla, and all of a sudden we became human. And now we say, well, what happened to the other gorillas? What happened to the other monkeys? Because I'm confused about that one.
Neo-Darwinism seems to enjoy almost universal acclaim among science journalists, bloggers, biology textbook writers, and other popular spokespersons for science as the great unifying theory of all biology. But there's been problems with the theory that are being reported in the peer-reviewed literature that are not being reported to the public.
I believe in microevolution. I believe that there are real evolutionary processes. I'm skeptical about what's called universal common descent, the idea that all living forms have evolved from one single common ancestor. I'm profoundly skeptical about chemical evolution, the idea that the non-living chemicals in a prebiotic ocean or prebiotic soup arrange themselves to form the first living cell. And I'm also skeptical about the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism, which, as it happens, so are many leading evolutionary biologists today. I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London, Royal Society being the oldest and most august scientific body in the world. And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who were essentially dissatisfied with neo-Darwinism, the standard textbook theory that we learn in all high school and college textbooks. And many of them were saying we need a new theory of evolution.
What the theory of evolution is, and then if you could tell us what you think is incomplete or wrong about it.
What evolution does is it takes from that first cell and says, how do we get the diversity of what we have today from that first cell? That cell then modified into the diversity of life that you see today. To do that, it's a huge, huge leap. The definition of evolution is constantly evolving, but there are two distinct things. There's something called microevolution and there's macroevolution. Microevolution we definitely see. We can see changes over time in, say, the bill of a bird. These are very small mutations that may happen, but what you never see are what is called body plan changes. Body plan change would be an invertebrate, something that does not have a spine, going to a vertebrate, something that has a spine. There are hypotheses where people will see fossils and they'll say, oh, this must have been a precursor to this. They will never see the transformative thing. The only thing that you will see is people will hypothesize over that fossil. They'll see a fossil here and a fossil here, and they'll say, this must have been the transition to this.
Right.
And they'll hypothesize with that. But it doesn't have to be the transition. This is strictly a hypothesis. And so we don't see that in the fossil record. We've never seen the macroevolution, the body plan change.
What's your stance on like the theory of evolution?
As far as the theory of evolution, it is a theory. We certainly see microevolution, small changes. We see it all the time in my own lab. We work a lot with bacteria. And you see small perturbations in DNA. You have epigenetics where there's external things that causes changes in us. You know, every time we get a new virus, it can change our DNA, and that gets passed on to our children. In my lab, every time we had a bacterial cell, it remains as a bacterium. Every time we had a mouse, it remained as a mouse. I think there's a big extrapolation to having gross changes in organisms. Body plan changes are much harder for me to understand the chemical changes that come about. So what I do is I ask my biochemist friends, explain to me how you get massive body plan changes through the theory of evolution. And they will say one small change at a time. I say, okay, now let's get rid of the just so stories and explain to me the chemistry on how that can begin to take place. And none of them will answer me. And remember, no answer is an answer in itself.
Or a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, and he simply enumerated the 5 major, what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism. And his basic perspective was the mutation selection mechanism does a good job of optimizing or modifying pre-existing forms. It can generate small-scale variation, but it does a very poor job of explaining the origin of those forms. Think about, for example, Darwin's finch beaks. Great job of explaining how variations in weather patterns result in changes in the shape and structure of the finch beaks. But that mechanism turns out not to do a good job of explaining the origin of birds or other major animal groups in the first place. So modification, yes. Innovation, no.
Interesting is Stephen Jay Gould was a very famous evolutionist, and he recognized this problem and actually admitted that it was a huge problem for evolution. In fact, he called it the trade secret of paleontology, that we do not see transitional forms in the fossil record. The creatures that we see appear suddenly, they stay the same, they may disappear in the fossil record, but then be found alive and well today.
Yeah.
Or a creature may appear in the fossil record, disappear, and then reappear later in the fossil record. But anyways, it's all a huge problem for evolution, but it points directly to a global flood that occurred 4,500 years ago, because with these fossils, we see soft tissue.
Science has proven evolution, therefore evolution is true. Since evolution is true and Christians don't believe it, then Christians don't believe science and they aren't rational people. Really, let's put that claim to the test. First off, evolution in the sense that things change is evident. No rational person disputes that. Therefore, rational Christians believe it. We can observe change. But evolution in the sense that life came from non-life and then that life began to randomly generate new genetic information and over time it eventually produced humans is something entirely different and something that quite honestly doesn't hold up against science. In other words, evolution in the sense of molecules to man is not scientifically plausible and therefore should not be viewed as scientific fact. Quite honestly, it is in great opposition to science, that is, observational science, the kind of science we can test and repeat and use our 5 senses to understand. Science demonstrates that over time, living organisms lose genetic information. They don't gain it. That same science demonstrates that life doesn't arise from non-life.
Hey, where'd you
Follow
come
along if you would. Fact 1. There is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. That pretty much refutes evolution right away, because there's no way to go from a fish to an amphibian without adding new information, right? If living organisms cannot produce new genetic information, how can anything gradually change into something of higher intelligence or form or complexity? That is, how can anything evolve from an amoeba to a man without adding new genetic information? The answer, of course, is that it can't, plain and simple. Now, some have speculated and they have imagined all kinds of things, and they brought in artists to produce creative renderings based on guesses, and they have been successful in telling a very convincing story that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But those are just drawings, people. They're just stories. But what we really observe is humans are humans and apes are apes. Now, if fact 1 buried evolutionary thinking deep into the Precambrian soil, this next fact, fact 2, tosses so much sediment on it that not even the greatest team of paleontologists with the latest subterranean gizmo could dig up the remains. Check this out. Never, again, never has it been observed that life can come from non-life. So here are 2 major scientific evidences against evolution. I reiterate for clarity, life has never been observed to come from non-life, and there is no known, observable process by which new genetic information can be added to the genetic code of an organism. So, molecules to man evolution doesn't really make scientific sense. Yet we are all here, and life is all around us in various forms. Although evolution cannot account for this, the Bible can. The Bible reveals that the all-powerful, all-knowing, supernatural God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, and all life according to its kinds, that is, each with its own set of genetic information. So, again, what the Bible reveals makes sense of what we see and understand. Evolution does not. Enough said.
The main issue with evolution is we have taken enormous scientific leaps in the fossil records, right? So if evolution is true, then you find single-celled or multi-celled organisms, right? And you go from single-celled or two-celled organisms to four-celled, to 8-celled, to 16-celled. You go through a progressive evolution, if you will, of these organisms evolving into an increasingly more being-like creature. So evolution says basically that some bacteria got together in a mud puddle and they mated, and we went from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms to quadricellular to hexacellular to multicellular, and then these organisms began to form into systems that created organ systems, and then you basically had what is a rudimentary non-air breathing organism that was in the water to an organism that had gills, and then those gills moved out onto land, and then they started to breathe oxygen, and then this whole lineage of species evolved from this. The problem is there's zero evidence of that. The problem is you have these single-celled organisms and multi-celled organisms, and then there's just a giant gap in the fossil record. And you have animals, and then you have man. But we don't have a fossil record that takes us from single and multi-celled organisms into an entire species. And we just simply ignore that.
Wow,
and so,
I didn't know that.
You say point mutations, okay? There can be point mutations. The vast majority of those are deleterious. But okay, tell me the point mutations that have to take place to change one system into another. And generally, they'll present you with the immune system. Well, the immune system responds to what's presented to it, but it remains an immune system. It never changes into another system. It does not become an auditory system, does not become an optical system, does not become a respiratory system. It remains the immune system. You have to have dramatic system changes to explain evolution. So it's a very difficult thing to explain. Again, I could never say it didn't happen that way. I can just say, show me, guys. Show me how it happened. It's hard to chemically fathom. I look at this as a chemist. I can't just brush this thing over from 30,000 feet and suggest all these amazing things happen.
Speaking of evolution, to go from a primeval ape to a human being takes trillions of transitional forms. Trillions of mutations and transitional forms to go from a dinosaur to a bird, a whale to a cow, right? Trillions. It's interesting, Darwin, The Origin of Species in 1863, he says we're going to find them eventually. We're going to dig up the earth. We're going to find all these trillions of transitional forms from ape to human being. What have we found? What does the fossil record show? Trillions? No. Billions? No. Millions? Yeah, no. Thousands? No. Hundreds? Come on, 100? No. A dozen? No. 6 or 7? Maybe. And they're probably extinct apes that they say, oh, these are the trillions of transitional forms. Okay, interesting.
Chance of one simple 100-unit protein coming together by accident is a very big number. Time and chance make evolution absolutely impossible. The fourth postulate that evolution is based on is that what we see today, minor genetic variation in species, is evidence of macroevolution. So because cats are different colors, dogs are different sizes, that means that fish turned into cows. And of course, we know that that's not true because Mendel proved that all the genes that exist today, you can shuffle them around, but there are no new genes that were created. Let's think about the 4 major postulates of creation. Number 1, where there's a design, there must be a designer. We see codes in DNA. Codes are evidence of intelligence because you have to translate from one language to another. We have not a single example of that happening by accident.
This is not a matter of if you stretch out time longer, that actually solves the core problem here.
Time does not help you. It hurts you. In the case of RNA, which is the primary hypothesis on how life might have started, you have no time. You have no time. You only have hours in order to use this. Hours. That's a big, big problem.
We've unearthed millions of fossils around the world, so with all this evidence, so to speak, it's clear that the fossil record proves evolution, right? Well, actually, no. Didn't when Darwin was alive, and hasn't since he's been gone. In fact, Chucky D himself knew this when he wrote the following: geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this, perhaps, is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Okay, but surely after all the time since Darwin, digging and discovering fossil after fossil, we have a more perfect geological record that supports evolution, right? Not even close, bud. Listen to how 2 renowned evolutionary biologists summarize the truth. Instead of finding the slow, smooth, and progressive changes, they saw in the fossil record rapid bursts of change, new species appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then remaining unchanged for millions of years, patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation.
The DNA of the anatomically modern humans and our DNA, it's essentially the same DNA. We showed up on this earth as fully realized, fully enabled, fully capacitated, anatomically modern humans 200,000 years ago, and we haven't changed. Why did it happen? That's not Darwin's idea of evolution. Even he had questions as to why we don't see more of the kind of evidence that he said should be available if we in fact are the result of this long, slow, gradual evolution. So Darwin knew that there were problems with his theory. Darwin, as I mentioned earlier, never claimed that his theory would be the theory to end all theories. It was a bridge. It was intended as a stepping stone to get us started, to get us from where we have been on a path of a new way of thinking.
It's a double helix that right turns, and there are these sulfur bridges in the midst of every single atom that you have that has a code. And what happens is every 10 there's a bridge, and then every 5 there's a bridge, and then every 6 there's a bridge, and then every 5 there's a bridge, and then it repeats over and over and over and over again. And that's a part of your DNA, that's a part of my DNA. This is something that we just recently discovered, this whole thing of 10, 5, 6, 5. Well, what is amazing is with the numbers actually correspond with Jewish letters. The number, if you notice that there's 2 number 5s, both of those are H's. And then if you'll notice that the number 10 is a Y and the number 6 is a W, it's how the Jews spell Yahweh. And God's name is literally written in your DNA. Okay, well, you see how there's 2 number 5s and there's 2 H's. The word for both of those is behold, behold. The symbol for the Y is a hand, and the symbol for the W is a nail. The name Yahweh means, behold the nails in my hands.